This story is titled, My Girlfriend Went on a Cross-Country Trip with Her Male Friend Who Booked One Hotel Room for Both of Them Without Asking Me First. And she is so cool about it. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey guys, okay, so guess I, 22 male, need to give you guys some background about how everything started, because this whole situation is honestly pretty messed up, and I'm still trying to process it all. This all began back in my freshman year at Boston University. I remember it was like the second week of classes, and I was completely lost trying to find the science building for my physics lab. You know how confusing college campuses are when you're new, right? So I'm standing there looking at this totally useless campus map on my phone, probably looking super confused, when this girl comes up and asks if I need help. That was my girlfriend. Let's call her Kate. She was carrying like 50 books. She's pre-med, and yeah, she's one of those super organized people who actually buys all the textbooks. Turns out we were headed to the same building, just different floors. We started talking on the way there, and it was just easy. Like, you know how sometimes you meet someone and there's no awkward silences or trying to think of what to say next? That's how it was with Kate. We ended up talking about how we both grew up gaming. We even missed our bus stop because we were so deep in conversation about which Pokemon generation was the best. She says Gen 3, but obviously it's Gen 4. After that, we kept running into each other around campus. Like, we'd see each other at the dining hall or the library, and eventually we started studying together. I started catching feelings pretty quick, but I didn't want to mess up our friendship, you know? We had this great thing going, and I'd seen too many friend groups get weird after people tried dating. Plus, Kate was drop-dead gorgeous, confident, and seemed to have her whole life mapped out. Meanwhile, I was still figuring out my path. We were just in different places, and I admired how put together she seemed. When I finally got the courage to ask her out, she said yes. She was smiling so big, and later she told me she'd been waiting for me to ask for weeks. Our first date was actually pretty funny. Everything that could go wrong did. The movie theater lost power halfway through the film, then the restaurant I picked had a 2-hour wait, and it started raining while we were walking around looking for somewhere else to eat. We ended up getting pizza and eating it while sitting in the stairwell of her dorm building because it was the only dry spot we could find. But honestly, it was perfect. That was 2 years ago. Everything was great for a long time. Kate and I just fit together. She's the kind of person who makes lists for everything and plans stuff weeks in advance, while I'm more go with the flow. But somehow it worked. I really thought she was the one, you know? Like, I could actually see a future with her. We'd talk about what kind of house we wanted someday, joke about what we'd name our kids, that sort of thing. She wanted to be a pediatrician, and I finally decided on computer science. We had this whole plan about moving to California after graduation, where she'd do her residency and I'd work at a tech company. But then this guy, who we'll call Brandon, because that's his name, and I don't care enough to censor it, he shows up at the start of our sophomore year. He transferred from some college in Texas. He never actually said which one, which should have been a red flag, I guess. He lived like 3 doors down from Kate, and somehow he just started showing up everywhere. At first, I didn't think much of it. Like, he seemed pretty normal. Tall guy, always wearing these expensive-looking sweaters and carrying a camera around saying he was into photography, but I never saw him actually take a single photo. He started hanging out with Kate's study group, and then he was just there, all the time. I noticed pretty quick that something was off about him. He'd do this thing where he'd make these comments that were kind of inappropriate, but if you called him out, he'd be like, "Oh, I'm just joking," or "You're too sensitive." Like this one time, we were all studying in the common room, and Kate was wearing this new sweater. Brandon goes, "Wow, that sweater makes you look so good. You should wear tight stuff more often." When I gave him a look, he would laugh, "What? Can I compliment my friend?" The weird thing is, Kate totally saw through his act. She'd tell me stuff like, "Yeah, Brandon's kind of sketchy sometimes," or "I know he can be manipulative." But then she'd follow it up with, "But he's really not that bad once you get to know him," or "I know how to handle him." She had this idea that she could somehow fix him or keep him in check. Looking back, I think she liked feeling needed, like she was the only one who could control him. Brandon would pull these stunts that were obviously attention-seeking. Like, he'd text Kate at 2 a.m. saying he was having a crisis, but when she'd rush over, he'd just want to talk about some minor drama with his roommate. Or he'd forget his wallet when we were all getting food, so someone, usually Kate, would have to pay for him. He never paid anyone back, BTW. The amount of time they spent together started getting ridiculous. They had 3 classes together, which I later found out wasn't a coincidence. He specifically signed up for her sections, and he'd always insist they needed to study together. Even when they didn't have the same assignments, he'd find some reason to be around. Kate would be like, "Oh, Brandon just needs help with his essay," or "Brandon's going through some stuff and needs someone to talk to." She started spending time with her friend more than me. I tried talking to her about it a few times. The first time was after this party where Brandon got super handsy with Kate while dancing. I pulled her aside the next day and was like, "Hey, doesn't that make you uncomfortable?" She just laughed it off and said, "That's just how Brandon is. He doesn't mean anything by it. He's just a friend." The thing that really got to me was how he'd try to compete with me, but in this really subtle way. If I mentioned taking Kate somewhere for dinner, he'd suddenly have tickets to some fancy concert the same night. If Kate and I had plans to study together, he'd create some emergency that required her attention right then. He even started dressing like me sometimes, which was just weird. Our mutual friends started noticing too. My roommate Chris asked me once, "What's the deal with that Brandon guy?" And my friend Rachel straight up told Kate she got bad vibes from him. But Kate would always defend him. She'd say stuff like, "You guys just don't understand him," or "He's had a really tough life," though his stories about his past changed every time he told them. I remember this one specific incident that should have been a huge warning sign. It was during finals week last semester. Kate and I had planned to study together all day Sunday. It was kind of our tradition before big exams. But at 7 a.m., Brandon texted her saying he was having a panic attack about his final. Kate spent the entire day with him, only to find out later that his final wasn't even until the following week. When I told her that seemed manipulative, she got defensive and said, "I know Brandon can be a lot sometimes, but I'm the only one who knows how to calm him down. He needs me." That's when I realized she was kind of addicted to this savior role she'd created for herself with him. The really messed up part? Brandon would act completely different when Kate wasn't around. Like one time I ran into him at the campus coffee shop, and he straight up ignored me. But as soon as Kate walked in, he was all smiles and friendly. He'd also make these little comments when Kate wasn't paying attention. Stuff like, "You're lucky to have her for now," or "She could do better, you know." I put up with all of it because I trusted Kate. I really did. Even though Brandon was obviously into her, I believed her when she said she had no interest in him that way. But to explain what was really happening, I need a metaphor. You ever heard the parable about a boiling frog? If you slowly turn up the heat, the frog doesn't realize it's being cooked alive. But if you gave the frog a thermometer, maybe it'd realize what was happening and hop out. That's what was happening with Kate. Except instead of jumping out, she kept telling me she could handle the heat. But everything really started falling apart one evening. Kate and I were at this little Vietnamese place we always go to, and she just casually dropped this bomb on me. So Brandon invited me on this ski trip to Colorado for his birthday. I literally stopped with my spoon halfway to my mouth. We live in Boston, and Colorado's literally on the other side of the country. So I'm sitting there trying to process this, and she just keeps eating like she didn't say anything weird. "Wait, what? When is this?" I asked her. "Oh, in 2 weeks. It's gonna be at this really nice resort in Aspen. Brandon says the slopes there are amazing." 2 weeks. She drops this on me 2 weeks before the trip. When I asked her more about it, turns out Brandon had already bought the plane tickets. Like before even asking her. Who does that? Who buys plane tickets for someone without checking first? But Kate was acting like this was totally normal. She's sitting there telling me about all the ski runs and how Brandon found this great deal on lift tickets, and I'm just getting more and more confused. She kept going on about how nice the resort was and how Brandon had planned all these activities. What really got me was how she barely mentioned any other people going. Like, wasn't this supposed to be his birthday trip? Wouldn't there be other friends there? But every time I asked about who else was going, she'd get kind of vague and change the subject. The whole thing felt off. Brandon's suddenly Mr. Moneybags when it comes to spending on Kate, but can't pay back the $40 he owes Rachel for DoorDash. Make it make sense. I told her if she really wants to go, I'll come with her. Then she hits me with this. "You know, he actually wanted to invite you too, but he couldn't afford another ticket." Sure, Brandon, sure. This is the same guy who just last week was showing off his new $800 camera lens. But somehow he can afford 2 plane tickets to Colorado and a hotel room, but not a third ticket? I tried asking about the hotel situation, but Kate kept being super vague about it. Just said Brandon had it covered and changed the subject. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. After dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The whole thing seemed weird. The sudden invitation, the already bought tickets, the way Kate kept dodging certain questions. I needed to know more about what exactly Brandon had planned. That night, I couldn't sleep, just kept thinking about everything. The way Brandon looks at Kate when he thinks no one's watching, the inappropriate comments he makes, the way he always finds excuses to touch her or be near her, and now he's taking her across the country for a week? I decided to do some digging. Maybe I was being paranoid, but something about this whole trip felt really wrong. Looking back now, I wish I'd been wrong. I spent the next day on my laptop. I found the resort's website and started looking up room types, trying to figure out what kind of setup Brandon had booked. Something still felt off about how vague Kate had been about the whole thing. I messaged Jake, Brandon's roommate, pretending I was trying to plan a surprise for the group. He wrote back saying he didn't know anything about any group. As far as he knew, it was just Brandon and Kate going. Then he sent me a screenshot of Brandon's booking confirmation that he'd seen on their shared printer. 1 room, 2 separate beds, 7 nights. Just the 2 of them. My hands were literally shaking. It wasn't a king bed or some romantic package. That would have at least been obvious what Brandon was trying to do. No, this was almost worse. He was playing it smart, making it seem just innocent enough that Kate could defend it. But sharing any room with him for a week, alone in a different state, that's not okay. I texted Kate right then, asking to meet at our usual spot in the library, first thing in the morning. Figured we should talk somewhere private because I knew this wasn't going to be pretty. She showed up wearing Brandon's university hoodie. Like, seriously? That just made me more sure about what I needed to say. Hey, she said, sitting down across from me. I got worried when you texted so late. Is everything okay? I pulled up the screenshot Jake had sent me. Want to explain this? She looked at it for a moment, then seemed almost relieved. Oh, is that what you're worried about? See, it's 2 separate beds. Brandon made sure to book that specifically so you wouldn't be uncomfortable. That just made me more angry. The fact that Brandon had thought about my reaction meant he knew exactly how inappropriate this was. He wasn't being thoughtful, he was being calculating. So you weren't going to tell me about the room situation at all? Just hope I wouldn't find out? I was going to tell you. I knew you'd overreact. See? You're overreacting right now. Overreacting? Kate, he's taking you across the country, sharing a room with you for a week, and didn't even ask me how I felt about it first. The beds are separate. It's not like... This isn't about the beds. This is about you sharing any room with a guy who's obviously into you, who makes inappropriate comments about you, who's taking you thousands of miles away from everyone you know. She started doing that thing where she plays with her hair when she's nervous. I don't understand why you're making such a big deal about this. Brandon's not like that. I've told you a million times. I don't have feelings for him. He's just a friend. Handle him? Why do you need to handle anyone? Don't you see how messed up that is? Her phone buzzed. She checked it immediately, of course, and I saw her smile at whatever Brandon sent. That's when I knew what I had to do. I'm done, I said. If you go on this trip with him, we're done. This isn't a discussion or a negotiation. It's a boundary. Her head snapped up. Are you giving me an ultimatum? Yeah, I guess I am. Because I've spent the last year watching you prioritize his feelings over our relationship, and I'm tired of it. 2 separate beds doesn't make this okay. You're still choosing to put yourself in a situation where you're alone with him for a week. That's not fair. He's my friend, and he spent all this money. Money he spent without asking you first. Don't you see how manipulative that is? He was trying to do something nice for his birthday. No, Kate. He's trying to get you alone in a hotel room across the country. Separate beds or not, that's his plan. And you're letting him. She grabbed her bag. I can't deal with this right now. Brandon's waiting for me. We have study group. Of course he is, I said. He's always waiting, isn't he? She left without saying anything else. I sat there for a while, looking at all our study notes still scattered on the table. 2 years of memories in this spot, and it might all be over because of some manipulative guy with ski tickets. I'm not sure if I'm overthinking, but this whole thing just isn't adding up. What's making it worse is how she's acting like it's totally normal, like any friend would do this. I can't tell if she's clueless or if she knows exactly what Brandon is up to and is just playing along. Either way, I'll update you guys once I figure out where this is all going. Update 1. Hey everyone, I just wanted to post an update on my relationship situation with my girlfriend. Sorry if this doesn't make sense. I'm exhausted, emotionally drained. So after that conversation I had with my girlfriend in the library, I didn't hear from her for 2 days. Like, complete radio silence. No texts, no calls, nothing. It was weird because we usually texted all day. Now my phone was just quiet. I kept checking it anyway, hoping she'd message me saying she realized how messed up this whole situation was. My roommate Chris tried to distract me. He kept inviting me to play games or go to the gym, but I couldn't focus on anything. I just kept thinking about all the red flags I'd ignored, like how Brandon would always find ways to touch Kate, fixing her hair, adjusting her jacket, always sitting pressed up against her on the couch during movie nights, and how she just let it happen because she thought she had some kind of special power over him. 3 days after our library talk, Kate posted a picture on Instagram. It was her and Brandon at the campus coffee shop, surrounded by travel brochures and a laptop showing the Aspen Resort website. The caption was something about planning adventures with my best friend. Best friend. Right. That's when I knew she'd made her choice. She finally texted me later that night. Just a simple, "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. What was there to say? She knew exactly how I felt about the trip. She knew what would happen if she went, and she was choosing to go anyway. The next few days were just weird. We had 2 classes together, and suddenly I had to figure out where to sit. For 2 years, I'd automatically saved her a spot next to me. Now I started showing up right as class started, sitting in the back corner. I could see her looking for me sometimes, but I just focused on my notes. Our friends didn't know how to handle it. Rachel tried to talk to Kate about it, telling her this trip was a bad idea, but Kate just gave her the same lines about how she could handle Brandon and how everyone was overreacting. Tom, who lived in Brandon's dorm, told me he overheard Brandon on the phone bragging to someone about how the trip was going to be epic and how he finally got her away from that loser boyfriend. A week before the trip, Kate started this weird campaign to make me change my mind. She'd send these long texts about how I was being controlling, how I didn't trust her, how real relationships need freedom and trust. Each message just made me more sure I was making the right choice. She wasn't understanding, or maybe she didn't want to understand, that this wasn't about trust. It was about her constantly choosing Brandon's feelings over mine. The day before she left, she cornered me after class. Started saying how she'd gotten Brandon to agree to her sleeping on the couch in the hotel room. Like that somehow made it better. She said she'd even pay for her own lift tickets so she wouldn't owe him anything. The fact that she thought these small changes fixed anything just showed how much she didn't get it. I walked away from that conversation feeling weirdly calm. Like I was sad, yeah, but mostly I just felt done. Done with the drama. Done with watching my girlfriend bend over backwards to accommodate some manipulative guy's schemes. Done with being made to feel like I was the unreasonable one for having basic boundaries. The morning of her flight, she sent me one last text. "I really wish you could understand. We'll talk when I get back." I didn't respond, but I did something else. I blocked her number and her social media. Not out of spite or anything, but because I knew I needed a clean break. No checking her Instagram stories. No waiting for texts. No wondering if she was posting pictures from Colorado. Chris found me in our room that afternoon, just staring at my phone's blank screen. He didn't say anything, just grabbed our controllers and loaded up Mario Kart. We played for hours, and for a few minutes at a time, I could almost forget that my girlfriend of 2 years was on a plane to Colorado with a guy who'd been trying to break us up since day one. So yeah, she went on that trip anyway, completely ignoring me and everything I said. But I meant what I said. When she gets back, she won't find me waiting. I'll keep you guys posted. Update 2. Okay, I'm back. This part's pretty rough to write about, but you guys deserve to know what happened after everything I've shared so far. I found out most of this stuff from Brandon's roommate Jake, who's actually a decent guy, despite choosing to live with that snake. So the first few days of their trip, everything seemed normal from what little I heard through mutual friends. Kate was posting these generic pictures of the ski resort and mountains on her Instagram. Yeah, I know I blocked her, but Rachel showed me. Brandon was barely in any of them, which should have been weird considering it was supposed to be his birthday trip. Then on day 3, everything changed. Jake messages me on Instagram. We weren't even friends really, just knew each other from running into each other at parties. He's like, "Hey man, I need to tell you something about Brandon and Kate." My stomach just dropped. You know that feeling when you know you're about to hear something bad? Turns out Brandon had been texting his friends back home the whole time, bragging about his master plan. Jake saw the messages in their shared PlayStation chat. Brandon had planned this whole thing months in advance. The one hotel room wasn't because of money. Dude literally turned down a free upgrade to a 2-bedroom suite when they checked in. He'd been telling his friends back in Texas how he was gonna finally getting laid with Kate. The worst part? He'd invited like 6 of his friends from Texas to meet them in Aspen. He just didn't tell Kate about it. So while she thought this was some friendly ski trip, he had this whole crew of guys coming to party for his birthday. Real classy. According to Jake, Brandon took Kate to this really advanced ski trail on the 3rd day. She's barely skied before, something Brandon knew, and he just left her there when she got scared. Told her he'd go get help, then disappeared for 2 hours. When he finally came back, she was freezing and terrified. He played it off like he'd been looking everywhere for her, acting all concerned and protective. That night, he convinced her to come to this party his friends were throwing in their room. Kate was pretty shaken up from the ski incident, and Brandon kept bringing her these mixed drinks his friends were making. Jake showed me the text Brandon was sending to the group chat. He was literally telling them to make her drink stronger while pretending to be this caring friend who was just looking out for her. I won't go into detail about what happened next because it makes me sick to my stomach. But basically, Brandon got what he wanted. And the next morning, he completely ghosted her. Just left her alone in the hotel room and went skiing with his friends. Kept telling her he'd be right back, but never showed up. Jake sent me screenshots of Brandon bragging about it to their group chat. This dude was literally sending messages like, "Mission accomplished," and told you guys I'd get her. He even had the nerve to say, "Bet her boyfriend won't want her back now." His friends were all congratulating him like he'd just won some game. The whole time, he was posting these stories on his Instagram of him and his friends partying and skiing, not a mention of Kate anywhere. She wasn't in a single photo. It was like she didn't even exist. I found out later that Kate tried to change her flight to go home early, but the change fee was like $500 and she couldn't afford it. So she was stuck there, in a strange city, with a guy who'd completely used and discarded her. When Jake told me all this, I was physically shaking. Not because I was jealous, that wasn't it at all. I was angry because someone I cared about had been manipulated and hurt by someone she thought was her friend, someone she thought she could handle. But here's the thing that really gets me. Brandon knew exactly what he was doing from day one. Every friendship moment, every crisis where he needed her help, every time he played up being this misunderstood guy who just needed someone to believe in him, it was all part of his plan. So after finding out everything from Jake, I spent like 3 days just sitting with this information. Didn't tell anyone at first, not even Chris. I mean, what was I supposed to say? The whole thing made me feel gross, even though I wasn't the one who did anything wrong. Then Kate came back to campus. Man, seeing her in the dining hall that first day, she looked completely different. Not just sad or tired, but like empty. She was wearing this oversized hoodie, not Brandon's this time, and barely looked up from her food. Rachel tried sitting with her, but she just made some excuse and left. Brandon, though? This guy was strutting around campus like he'd won a trophy or something. He'd added all these new guys from the trip to our campus Facebook group, and they were all commenting on his posts with inside jokes about the Aspen trip. Real subtle stuff like legendary birthday. Made me want to throw up. The whole friend group basically exploded. It started when Rachel found out what happened. She went straight to Brandon's dorm and just completely lost it on him in the hallway. Called him every name in the book, loud enough that like half the floor heard everything. Brandon tried playing it cool, acting all confused like, why is everyone so upset about a fun ski trip? That's when things got really messy. Some people actually took Brandon's side, if you can believe that. Like this girl Katie from Kate's study group kept saying stuff like, well, she chose to go on the trip, and she should have known better. As if that made what Brandon did okay? Those people aren't our friends anymore, obviously. The screenshots from Brandon's group chat started circulating around campus. Some of his Texas friends had shared them in their stories, thinking it was all some big joke. That's when Kate finally found out that the whole thing had been planned from the start. She stopped coming to classes for like a week after that. I wanted to reach out to her, you know? Part of me felt guilty, like maybe if I'd tried harder to stop her from going. But Kate made her choices, and Brandon is the only one responsible for his actions. The whole thing got even worse when Brandon's ex from Texas found Rachel on Instagram and started sharing stories about him. Turns out he'd pulled similar stuff before. She said he has mental health and alcohol issues, planning elaborate trips, isolating girls from their boyfriends or friends, always somehow managing to book just one room. This was literally his move. He'd done it at least twice before transferring to our school. About 2 weeks after they got back, Kate tried to talk to me. She showed up at my dorm room late one night, crying so hard she could barely speak. Wanted to explain everything. Said she needed me to understand how sorry she was. But honestly, I couldn't even look at her. Not because of what happened with Brandon, that wasn't her fault, but because of all the months she'd dismissed my concerns, treated me like I was paranoid, made me feel crazy for seeing exactly what Brandon was. The hardest part was watching her slowly realize how many friends she'd pushed away because of Brandon. All those times she'd blown people off because he needed her. All those study groups she'd ditched because he was having a crisis. All those movie nights she'd skipped because he was going through something. She'd damaged so many friendships trying to fix someone who was just playing her the whole time. But I just couldn't stay silent. I knew I had to do something. Not for Kate, she made her choices, but because guys like Brandon don't just stop. So, I gathered everything. The screenshots from Jake, the booking confirmations, the texts where Brandon bragged about his master plan. Then I reached out to his ex from Texas, and she unloaded. Screenshots of him planning similar trips with other girls, messages admitting to manipulating people, even a video of him bragging about getting his underage brother wasted. It was like he documented his own downfall. He had no idea his house of cards was about to collapse. I sent everything to the campus housing office, the student conduct board, and of course, his fraternity leadership. But the real bomb? That fancy camera he always carried. Turns out he'd been secretly taking creepy photos of girls at parties and sharing them with his friends. The housing office acted fast, kicking him out of the dorms immediately. His frat, they dropped him the same day. Rachel still talks to Kate sometimes. Says she's in therapy now, working through everything. Good for her, honestly. But every time I see her around campus, I just remember all those times she told me she could handle Brandon. All those times she picked him over me. All those times she made me feel like I was the problem. I know this whole thing sounds crazy. Like, how could someone fall for such an obvious manipulation? But that's the thing about guys like Brandon. They're patient. They play the long game. Every move is calculated. Every crisis is planned. Every friendship is just another step in their strategy. Next time, I'll tell you guys about what I'm doing now, how I'm dealing with everything. But right now, I need to go to the gym or something. Get some of this anger out. Just writing this down has got me all worked up again. Final update. All right, final update time. It's been about 4 months since everything went down. And honestly, life's different now. Not better or worse, really, just different. First couple months were rough, not gonna lie. I'd see Kate around campus and my whole day would just be messed up. Had to change my whole routine. Started getting coffee at this place across campus instead of our usual spot. Found a new study corner in the library. Even switched sections in 2 of my classes. My grades took a hit for a while. Kind of hard to focus on coding projects when your brain keeps replaying 2 years of memories and trying to spot all the red flags you missed. My professors were pretty cool about it, though. Guess I wasn't the first student dealing with relationship drama in their classes. Chris has been solid through all this. Like, actually the best roommate anyone could ask for. He'd drag me to the gym when I'd been in bed too long, make sure I ate actual food instead of just ramen, and never complained when I'd wake him up at 3 a.m. to talk about random stuff because I couldn't sleep. The biggest change? I got a dog. Yeah, I know, classic breakup move, right? But hear me out. There was this shelter next to my new coffee spot, and I'd always look at the dogs through the window while waiting for my order. One day, this scruffy mutt just caught my eye. His name's Max, and he's probably the best decision I've made in a while. Having Max forces me to stick to a routine. Can't stay in bed all day when there's a dog who needs walks and food. Plus, he's got this thing where he puts his head on my lap whenever I'm feeling down. Like he just knows. The shelter said he's a mix of like 5 different breeds, but I'm pretty sure he's mostly just awesome. Campus feels normal again, mostly. Our friend group's smaller now, but honestly better. The whole thing kind of showed who really had our backs. Rachel's still around and she's actually dating Tom now. Saw that coming a mile away. Jake transferred to a different dorm, but still games with us sometimes. Found out last week that Brandon's pulling his usual stuff at his new school in Florida. Some girl's boyfriend messaged me on Instagram asking about him. Sent him the screenshots Jake had saved. Hope it helps them avoid what happened here. Kate? She switched to morning classes. I'm definitely not a morning person, so no risk of running into her. Rachel says she's doing better. Started volunteering at an animal shelter and focusing on her med school applications. Part of me hopes she's okay, but another part of me just needs to not think about her at all. I also started dating again last month. Nothing serious, just coffee with this girl from my new study group. She's cool, really into photography. The real kind, not Brandon's fake, carrying a camera everywhere but never taking photos kind. It's nice, but I'm taking it super slow. My therapist says that's healthy. Speaking of therapy, best thing I've done for myself. Found out our school offers free counseling sessions. My therapist helped me understand that none of this was my fault. Like, I had good instincts about Brandon from the start. I wasn't being paranoid or controlling. Sometimes the red flags are red flags for a reason. The whole experience changed me, but not in the way you might think. I'm not bitter about relationships or suspicious of everyone. If anything, I trust my gut more now. And I've learned that having boundaries doesn't make you controlling. It makes you smart. Got some good stuff coming up too. Taking a summer coding internship in Seattle, thanks to that professor who was understanding about my grades earlier this year. Max is coming with me. Already found a pet-friendly apartment and everything. Fresh start in a new city sounds pretty good right now. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Life moves on, you know? Sometimes things fall apart so better things can come together. Or maybe that's just something my mom says to make me feel better. Either way, I'm doing okay. And for now, that's enough. Thanks for letting me share this whole mess with you guys. Writing it all out actually helped more than I expected. Gonna go take Max for a walk now. He's giving me that look that means he's 5 minutes away from stealing my socks again.